I want to start tonight by saluting our Gang of Eight. I won't call them by name, we know their names, but 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, I want to thank them for their tireless efforts to bring this bipartisan legislation to the floor. I also want to commend Senator Leahy and the Judiciary Committee that he leads for their efforts to bring the committee together and to bring to the floor what I think most of us agree is important, very important legislation. In Delaware, Mr. President, we just celebrated the 375th anniversary of the arrival. First Swedes and Finns who came to America came right through what is now Wilmington, Delaware. And those just south of him, that spot about 5 miles to the south, William Penn first came to America as well. Those immigrants came to our country all those years ago for a lot of the same reasons that people come here today. They came to live what we now call the American dream. The remarkable idea that regardless of our background or station in life, people can still come to this country, work hard, build a better life for themselves and for their families. And today, some 400 years later, after those first immigrants settled in my own state, we're blessed to live in a thriving and prosperous nation, in no small part because of the millions of immigrants who came together to build this nation. And we can all be proud of that history. As a nation of immigrants, we in Congress have, I think, a special responsibility to ensure that our immigration system is effective and it reflects our values. Those values are what inspire brave, hardworking, and committed people to take great chances to come to this nation. They're often seeking to escape violence, to lift themselves out of poverty, or simply to live a better life. These immigrants renew and enrich our communities. They enhance our economy. But we cannot and should not open our doors indiscriminately to everybody that wants to come here. We need an immigration system that is practical, that is effective, and in the end is fair. Fair to us, fair to the people who want to come here, fair to the people who have been in line to become citizens of this country sometime down the road. Today, however, our immigration system is, by most standards, broken. It's not effective in bringing the talent that we need and to maintain a strong and vibrant economy. Our immigration system does not give employers the assurances that someone that they want to hire is actually here legally and eligible to do some work. That system does not always focus our security efforts on the real risks from those who come here with the intent to do us harm. And finally, our immigration system does not address in a pragmatic or fair way the fate of more than 11 million undocumented people living in our country right now, many of whom came here as children and, like us, no home other than America. So with that said, how do we modernize our immigration laws in a way that's fair, in a way that's practical, and it makes our nation more secure, physically and also economically? I've always said that the key to immigration reform is border security. You'll recall the last major comprehensive effort this body made to reform our broken immigration system about 6 years ago fell apart because a number of my colleagues here claimed, with some justification, that our borders were not secure enough. And many of my colleagues claimed, justly or not, that the border was still too porous and that we'd be having the same debate 20 years later because of border controls, or the lack of those. People ask themselves, are our borders secure enough to ensure that we don't end up having the same debate 20 or 30 years down the line? And the answer for many of our colleagues, a lot of Americans, was no, they are not. That was then, this is now. 6 years later, a number of people will still argue, I guess, that our borders are not secure enough to even try to move forward with these reforms. I just disagree. And when I hear our colleagues ask, are our borders more secure? I'm often reminded of a friend, Mr. President, who says when you ask him how he's doing, he says, compared to what? Compared to what? Well, some say that our borders won't be secure until we stop every single person who tries to get across them illegally. I think it's clear that this is not a realistic goal or expectation. Let's go back a little bit in time. Take, for example, the border between East Germany and West Germany, most famously the Berlin Wall. This was perhaps the most secure border that our world has ever seen. Roughly 100 miles of concrete, electrified razor wire, and a 100-yard wide kill zone guarded by some 30,000 soldiers. 30,000. But still, people made it safely across this highly secured border every year. In fact, a recent report by the Council of Foreign Relations concluded that East Germany only stopped about 95% of those who tried to cross the border and enter West Germany. So even a ruthless regime willing to kill its own citizens couldn't stop desperate people in search of a better life. I don't think any reasonable person believes that we should try to replicate the East German border strategy. So what is the right comparison? Well, I'd suggest that maybe the right comparison is what our borders look like in 2007. Are our borders more secure today than they were then? Are they a lot more secure or just a little bit? I think they're a lot more secure. And how do I know? I have the privilege, Mr. Chairman, of chairing now the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. We held a number of hearings this year on border security. I think even more importantly, I've had the opportunity to visit our borders with Mexico and actually up on Canada, along with Senator John McCain, Congressman Michael McCall from Texas, Secretary Janet Napolitano. Met with all kinds of local officials, sheriffs, police, mayors, and other folks. But 3 years ago, I visited the California border. Early this year, again, Arizona and Texas, up in Michigan. My goal was to get a first-hand look at what is working, what is not, and what more we ought to do to secure the border further. And we can. Based on what I've seen, there's overwhelming success, though, that our borders are more secure than they've been, and probably ever been, and certainly more secure than they were in 2007. I saw parts of our border, Mr. President, that were overrun with undocumented immigrants as recently as 2006. When the Border Patrol agents I met with told me they used to arrest more than 1,000 people every single day trying to get into this country illegally. Think about that, 1,000 people a day. Today, those same agents told me that they have a busy day if they arrest as many as 50 people. Is 50 too many? Yes, it is. But it is not 1,000 people a day. In fact, arrests at the border reached their lowest levels since the early 1970s, despite our putting massive investments in personnel and technology along the border. We're arresting significantly fewer people. And it's not because we're not on the lookout or trying to get those who come here. I got a slide here. This is just a slide of our southern border from the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico over here, from California into Arizona to parts of New Mexico and Texas all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It's divided into, about 4 states is divided into 9 different quadrants. We have here some interesting numbers. If you look here in 1992, the number of people that were arrested looks like about 565,000. This is just south of San Diego. We had in 2000, over here in the El Centro area of California, about 238,000. And initially, the numbers here in the west were huge. San Diego used to be stationed in the Navy in San Diego. Numbers were huge. It's kind of drifted this way. The borders here, where I used to go across the borders in south of San Diego into Mexico, about as remarkably secure. The challenge now lies all the way over here, and other places as well, but it really lies over here. We have not just Mexicans trying to get across, but a lot of people, maybe the majority of people trying to get across in South Texas today are from Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. But in 2005, just before, a year or two before we debated the last time the immigration reform proposals, Border Patrol was arresting, in this Yuma sector right here, 138,000 people, 138,000. Today, the number is 6,500. Think about that. From 138,000 down to 6,500. And come on over here, let's look at the Tucson sector. The year 2000, we were arresting about over 600,000. Today, about 120,000. And here in the El Paso sector, 1993, we're arresting close to 300,000. Now, right around 10,000. And again, it's not because we're not trying. It's not because we don't have more people, a lot more people there, a lot better technology. The number of folks coming across is just significantly diminished. Over here in Texas, though, still 1997, about 250,000 coming across and arrested. And today, still about 97,000. So there's still a good number, too high a number. They're trying to get across, and we're arresting a number of those. But the change in these numbers, dramatic reductions from 97 to today, is not a fluke. It's not an accident. This precipitous drop in arrests is a direct result of the unprecedented investments we've made in securing our borders over the past decade. If you don't have to take my word for it. Here's what several of our border officials and residents who are true experts have to say about the progress we've made in securing our borders. I'll quote just a few. I talked to a whole lot more, so I'm sure some of my colleagues have been down there, have talked to a bunch of local officials in those states too. Here's what the mayor of San Antonio said earlier this year before the the House Judiciary Committee. Mayor Julian Castro, San Antonio. He said, in Texas, we know firsthand that this administration has put more boots on the ground along the border than any other time in our history, which has led to unprecedented success in removing dangerous individuals with criminal records. The mayor of Nogales, Arizona, one of the places that we visited earlier this year with Secretary Napolitano, here's what the mayor there says, we used to have street chases all the time. He said, now all those things are gone. Something you don't even hear about. And that was from about 2-3 months ago. And a woman named Veronica Escobar, she's a county judge in El Paso, said this was near the end of 2011. Those of us who actually live along the border know otherwise. El Paso, the largest city along the U.S.-Mexican border, is also one of the country's safest cities in the heart of a vibrant binational economy. So the truth is, we spend more on border security each year, about $18 billion, according to a recent Migration Policy Institute report, $18 billion a year. We spend more on that than we spend on the rest of federal law enforcement activities combined. Just think about that for a moment. We spend more on border enforcement, border security, than we spend on the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals combined. Since 2000, the Border Patrol alone has more than doubled in size. Its funding has almost quadrupled. We have built more than 650 miles of fencing along the border. That's roughly a third of our Mexican border. And to better secure parts of our border where a fence might not be as effective, we deployed a number of what I like to call force multipliers, and I'll talk about some of those later on. But I'm talking about technology that will help the Border Patrol do their job more effectively. In some parts of the border, it might be radars, it might be drones. In others, it might be cameras, towers, or handheld systems. For example, in the past couple of years, we've deployed roughly 350 towers, land-based towers, vehicle-based towers with advanced cameras and radars. We fly more than 270 aircraft and helicopters to monitor border regions. That's a 2,000-mile border. And also we're utilizing drones and lighter-than-air assets, blimps. You don't have to take my word for it. I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And got a couple of pictures here, some slides I want to show. Take a look at what the border looked like 7 years ago in 2006 and what it looks like today. This is my favorite. This is one of my favorite pictures, Mr. President. It's a picture of a ranch. It's a ranch, I believe this is not a ranch in Texas, not the King Ranch. Where is it? Arizona. Excuse me. Here it is. Look at this. It looks like it's almost like a junkyard. It looks like a place where people just come to drop their trash. And that's really what happened. Because every day, hundreds of people would come through here, through this ranch across the border, and this is what they left behind. This is the same place. This is the same place today. And it's not because the folks that are trying to get into our country have somehow gotten an environmental conscience and they just don't litter as much. That's not what's going on here. They're just not coming through as much. If you ever feel that, is our border more secure? Is it making a difference? I would just say, go down to that ranch and take a look. See what else, what do you have next? We spend a lot of money on infrastructure. This is a shot. Where is this? This is Douglas, Arizona. We're there along the southern border of Arizona. And what we have here, this is a before shot, and this is the same landscape. And what you see today actually looks like we've got a couple of fences. We've got a road in between them. You've got all kinds of probably detectors. And this is what it looked like before. Huge investments we made for miles and miles and miles. Let's see what we got next. We have something next from the Yuma sector in Arizona. Yuma sector is out of control. For border mile, I think we had the most illegal border crossings of any stretch of the border in 2006. Starting in 2006, the Border Patrol built more than 100 miles of fencing. 100 miles, and just in this one sector alone, in the Yuma sector, where it makes a lot of sense. They built access roads so that the Border Patrol can get to where they need to go quickly, deployed a bunch of cameras as well. Today, Yuma is the most controlled part of our border, and I reported those numbers earlier, dramatic reductions in the number of folks that are coming through. This is a place we were in Arizona, Nogales, and met with a bunch of local officials as well. This is a lovely piece of landscape right here. This may not be as lovely, but what it has is different. Here's an access road, and we can't put a Border Patrol agent every 100 feet along the border. But what we can do is try to get them where they need to go more quickly. And one of the ways we do that with access roads, and this is just an example of one of them in Nogales, near Nogales, Arizona. Here's another shot of Deming. This is in New Mexico, and what it does is shows what the area looked like in 2007 on the border. Doesn't look very hard to get across, and it wasn't. This is what it looks like today. Lighting, walls, ways for the Border Patrol to move quickly if they need to. It's just a different place today, and the numbers will demonstrate that that's made a difference. We are in Texas, Del Rio, Texas. I got a lot of water here. And in 2008, there was literally no infrastructure whatsoever in Del Rio, Texas. This was before, right around 2008. This is about a couple of years later. And the difference, now you can literally walk across the border. You didn't know it. You didn't know if you were in the U.S. or Mexico. Today, you know it. And we built significant fencing and all those all-important access roads. Far more secure border than it was. A place called Marfa, Texas. This is a border in the western part of Texas, actually near Big Bend National Park. In 2006, the border was wide open. This is lovely, isn't it? And so there are some people, particularly some of the locals, who are opposed to fencing. The reason why is because this now looks like this. The problem with this is that people are able to literally walk across, wade across in substantial numbers. They just don't do that anymore. And we've given up some scenic beauty, but at the same time, we have a whole lot of security that we never had before. Here's Harlingen, Texas. We're down close to Harlingen a month or two ago. This is the eastern part of Texas, over closer to the Gulf of Mexico. But we see a part of the border that as recently as 4 years ago, literally right here, you could walk across it. You could walk across there. You wouldn't know it. You just walk right across it, and a lot of people walked right across it. This is what it looks like now with fencing and access roads. They don't walk across it, and without them knowing it, and frankly, oftentimes without us knowing it. Here's one of my favorite pictures, Mr. President. This is a fence, and this is a fence that, in this case, at least stopped this vehicle. But a friend of mine likes to say, if you let me build a 20-foot fence, somebody will come along and build a 21-foot ladder. And somebody tried to be really clever here and find a way to get this vehicle. I'm not sure what that is. That's a Jeep or what. Tried to get it across. Didn't quite make it. But it's a good example. The people trying to get across are pretty ingenious. And they will try to build that 21-foot ladder, or in this case, a different kind of ladder. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, it worked. At least it worked to stop them. So thanks. I also want to show some of the force multipliers that are helping to enhance security efforts at our borders and our ports of entry. People are just these pictures, rather, just a small sample, Mr. President, of the massive improvements that we've made along the southern border from California to Texas. They show, I think, what any fair-minded person who has been to the border in recent years can tell us, and that is the investments we've made. We're actually paying off. God, I'd hope so. As much money as we've spent, you'd hate to think we spent it without getting any kind of result. One of the investments we've made is drones. We don't have a huge number of drones, but we got about, I think, four of them in Arizona. Got a couple in Texas. I think they got a couple up along the northern border, two up on the northern border, maybe in North Dakota, a couple over in Florida. We'll talk a little bit more about these. But let me just say, You put a drone up, put a VADR system, VADER system on it. They can fly at high altitudes. They can fly day, night. They can see in the rain. They can see in the dark. They can see when the sun is shining. And they are an incredibly effective asset when they fly. We'll talk a little bit later about the problem is they don't always fly. And they don't fly when the wind is more than 15 knots. And we have 4 of these in Arizona. Only one of them has a VADR system. And the 4 that we have, only about 2 of them are actually flying most of the time. And they only fly 5 days a week. So I think one of the keys here is we're going to use the drones. Let's make sure we have VADRs on them, on all of them. Let's make sure that they're able to fly more than 5 days a week. Let's make sure they're able to fly more than 16 hours a day. And let's properly resource these aircraft. What do we have next here? Old technology. The drone's pretty new. This is an old technology. These blimps and dirigibles have been around forever. Some of you may recall seeing a video of blimps like this from Kabul and Afghanistan. I talked on the phone this week with a fellow who's now our ambassador to Mexico. His name is Tony Wayne. He used to be the #2 guy in our embassy in Afghanistan. And I was talking about blimps. How do we use blimps in Kabul? And he says we use them in Kabul. We use them very effective. He said the great thing about blimps, you can put them up in bad weather. You can put them up when it's windy. Drones you can't fly more than 15 when the wind's more than 15 knots. These go up. They stay up. They don't run out of gas. You can hang more surveillance systems on, more pods, if you will, on these than you can on a lot of the other aircraft that we're flying. They don't run out of gas. And we use them with great effect in Kabul and Kandahar and other places in Afghanistan. And we ought to be able to do better with them on the border of Mexico. We're doing something. We need to do more, and they can be a great force multiplier as well. Here's a little bitty plane. It's called it's a Cessna. It's called a C-206. And has enough room to carry 2 people. We got, I think, about 17 of them. We saw one in, I think in Arizona. We saw a bunch more in Texas. It's really not cutting-edge technology. It's just cost-effective. And you can put these planes out for a while. They don't use much gas. They are a good platform for surveillance. Unfortunately, out of the 16 or 17 that we have, only one of them has a surveillance system that enables us to actually look down and find out what's going on the ground. It's sort of like sending us out in my old Navy P-3 airplane doing maritime surveillance, Mr. President. Occasionally we do search and rescue missions, and we'd send out the vast ocean with binoculars to look for somebody maybe in a little skiff or in a life preserver. I mean, it's like a needle in a haystack. And we're going to fly these planes. We ought to have them fully resourced, so with people with modern surveillance equipment and people operating this stuff. What do we have next? We got boats. We got helicopters, and got boats that will go fast. And along the Rio Grande River, we need boats that go fast. And off the coast of California, we need the same thing. And fortunately, we've got them. We don't have enough helicopters. One of the problems with our helicopters, we talked to some folks in East Texas, and they said basically they fly 3 different kind of helicopters. One's fairly modern, a couple others are not. The only one that the Border Patrol really are interested in is the one that's fairly modern, it's reliable, has good surveillance equipment. And what we were told by some people, if you're going to send us the other older, less reliable helicopters without the technology, don't send them. And what we need to have is more of the successful helicopter, or the one that's in demand, the one that will actually be a real force multiplier, and fewer of the ones that aren't. I thought this was an interesting slide here. This is night vision, I think goggles. We also have the ability to use the VADRs, the systems we put in our drones, and actually the one that's C-206 that we fly, and our cameras are ground-mounted cameras along the border. This is what we can see today. I mean, this is nighttime, but this is what we can see. And it's pretty easy to pick people up. And if we're going to ever be able to figure out who's getting across and how many are getting across, not getting across, we need this. We don't need this. Fortunately, we have this. And it's a force multiplier. We need to make sure that we use it well. And I'm just going to show us quickly just a series of some of these are cameras, these are radars, but they're ground-based. In this case, we have an operator right here. Let's look at a couple more if we could. Again, this one's one that's mounted on a truck bed. It can be moved around. Some of them are more permanent. Here's one that's more permanent. You got the Border Patrol here, right at the fence, and the ability to look north and south, east and west. Do you have any more? Is that okay? Thank you. The reason why I wanted to show these are just a couple examples of force multipliers. You know, we got all these men and women on the border. We basically double the Border Patrol. How do we make them more effective without just adding more and more bodies, our bodies, between the ports of entry? And we do it with this kind of technology. That's what we do. We can do it, and we can do it effectively, and I think we do it in a cost-effective way. And that's what we ought to do. Now, the bill that we're going to be debating this week, in the next couple of weeks, sets aside an additional $6.5 million for border security on top of the $18 billion we already spend today every year. $18 billion. The money in the bill, the $6.5 billion in the bill, will be used to add some 3,500 officers, not between the ports of entry. These big ports where, we're not talking about water ports, we're talking about land-based ports of entry where there's a lot of commerce, cars, trucks, pedestrians getting through, big commerce going through those ports of entry as well. But this legislation wisely would use some of that $6.5 billion extra dollars to hire another 3,500 officers to work in our ports of entry, to build some new infrastructure in those ports of entry and make them better, to procure new surveillance systems and aerial support for the Border Patrol. I also want to, for the first time in our nation's history, we've set a statutory goal for the Border Patrol in this legislation to arrest or turn back into Mexico some 90% of all those that are trying to get across illegally. So if you got 100 people trying to get in a given day at a particular spot, the idea is to know how many are actually trying to get in and how many you either detain or actually turn back. And the idea is to make sure that we have a 90% success rate, at least a 90% success rate. It's a tough goal, and it ensures accountability. Remember what I said about Germany? In Germany, with all the 100 miles of concrete, 30,000 soldiers, their effective rate was 95%. We're talking about something very close to that, 90%, without doing the kind of stuff they did in East Germany. Lastly, the bill that's before us calls for achieving persistent surveillance over the entire border, persistent surveillance, so we can know with a high degree of certainty how many people are trying to cross it illegally. Given the length of our borders and how rugged and how varied it is, this goal will be a challenging and costly one to achieve, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. As I learned from my trips to the border, there is simply no one size-that-fits-all solution for securing our border. It really depends on the terrain, which varies widely along the border region. That's why we need to systematically identify the best technology that allows us to use our frontline agents, the Border Patrol, more effectively, gives them the tools they need, or they tell us they need to be successful. One specific thing that I've seen on on my trips along the border, I've already talked about, that's C-206. Just think about it. You got an airplane, you can put up fly for 3-4 hours, and you can either send it out with binoculars, with one person looking with binoculars, or you can send it out with a surveillance system that is just lights out, that works in the day or the night, rain or not, and it gives us great images and a great capability. We also need to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security has the flexibility to deploy resources when and where it makes sense. For example, as I talked earlier about the blimps, the dirigibles that are tethered, they've proven to be enormously successful over in Afghanistan. And for anybody who doubts that, I just urge you to give our ambassador to Mexico a call, Ambassador Tony Wayne, who was our #2 guy in Afghanistan last time, was there a couple of years ago. But as I said earlier, those blimps, those dirigibles, they're old in terms of the technology, but we can hang a lot of stuff, a lot of surveillance equipment on them, and they do great work. In some places, they'll make a lot of sense. In other cases, maybe not so much. But the Department of Homeland Security needs to be able to swiftly put in place innovative tools like blimps when factors on the ground change or when they see the need for a new approach to securing certain portions of our borders. I don't think that we ought to be hamstringing them with mandates to make them less effective in carrying out their missions, including requiring additional fences in the area where the fencing really doesn't make much sense. In a lot of places it does. Like at 600 miles or so, it does. And there's some more places that it does. But there are also some places where it makes more sense to resource a drone, to have the land-based radars and cameras, where it makes more sense to fly the 206s, to have helicopters with the right kind of surveillance equipment on it and be able to move people along. I also want to mention some other cost-effective technologies. We saw something really interesting on these handheld devices that allow the border agents to see in the dark. I also saw something at I think it was one of the ports of entry, and they call it an Elmo. This is my BlackBerry. It was actually about the size of my BlackBerry. And I remember standing at the ports of entry where you have literally thousands of trucks and cars and vehicles and pedestrians coming across a day, many thousands. And the gal who was the officer there, as the trucks and the vehicles came through, before the truck or vehicle ever got to where we had like license plate readers, all kinds of stuff. But she had a device that would tell her the truck that's coming through, the history of the truck that's coming through, the driver that's in that truck, and the history of that driver coming through. Tell her the kind of should be in the truck and what's coming as a cargo in that truck in recent weeks and months. One of the officers, we saw this up in Detroit too, but one of the officers there said, this is a game changer, the Elmo. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this bill that we're debating is going to appropriate about $6.5 billion to continue to build on the progress we've made and achieve the ambitious goals it sets for the department. And that's good news. My goal is to make sure that much of this funding is devoted to these force multipliers that can help our boots on the ground work smarter, be more effective. Let me add, I don't think we need to micromanage the process. We don't need 535 of us in the Congress. And we've been joined here by the Majority Leader. Mr. Leader? Whenever you want me to yield, I'm happy to yield to you.
Okay.
I could go on forever, and I just might. So.
Yeah. Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I appreciate my friend for yielding and usual courtesy. I would ask, though, that his statement not appear interrupted in the record.
Without objection.
I've read into the record in some detail today a letter that he wrote with Senator Leahy talking about what has gone on in recent years about border security. The country is very fortunate to have this good man leading the Homeland Security Committee. I have a lot of senators I don't know as much about as I do know about this man, but we've been together since 1982. He had a sabbatical he took for 8 years to run the state of Delaware as governor, but other than that, we've been locked in arms moving forward. So I appreciate very much his yielding on this matter. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to pre-morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask consent the Senate proceed to S-Res 168.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 168, designating June 2013 as National Aphasia Awareness Month and supporting efforts to increase awareness of aphasia.
Is there objection to proceeding with the motion? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, motion to reconsider be laid off the table, and there be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask, Mr. President, we move to S-Res 169.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 169, designating the month of June 2013 as National Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Month.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table, and there be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask consent that S-954 be printed as if passed, be printed as passed by the Senate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Appropriations Committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 2217, that the papers with respect to the bill be returned to the House of Representatives as requested by the House, and when the bill is received back in the Senate, it be referred to the Appropriations Committee.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning, Thursday, June 13th. Following the prayer and the pledge journal, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal proceedings be approved to date, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. And the following in the leader remarks, the Senate resumed consideration of S-744, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill.
Without objection.
I therefore ask, if there's no further business come before the Senate, that following the remarks of this distinguished senator from Delaware, that the Senate adjourn under the previous order.
Without objection.
Mr. President, just picking up where I left off, I just want to say that I don't think we in the Congress need to micromanage this process. We don't need 535 congressional law enforcement officers, so to speak. Rather, we need to spell out the goals, the priorities for border and port security, which this bill does. We need to give the Department of Homeland Security the tools, the resources, flexibility it needs to get the job done, which this bill also does. Then we need to let DHS do its job while at the same time continue to provide responsible and robust oversight, not just here from Washington, but along the border itself. And that's what I now do and what my Committee on Homeland Security attempts to do, and it's what my colleagues and I want to ensure we do as this bill is implemented strongly and effectively. Still, as strong as our border defenses have become, and despite how much stronger this bill will make them, we cannot defend our nation entirely at the border. One of our witnesses earlier this year, Mr. President, noted that we often look to our borders to solve problems that originate elsewhere. Or in other words, we're so preoccupied with the symptoms that we're missing the underlying causes, which can make finding a solution all the more difficult. We've got to address the root causes that are drawing people to our country illegally in order to fully secure our borders and ensure that we're not embroiled in the same debate again 20 years from now. And I'm pleased to say that this bipartisan legislation addresses the root causes in a way that I believe is tough, is practical, and is fair. My friend and former Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Jane Hall-Lute, recently told me that we have to strike the right balance between enforcing security policies at our borders and ports of entry to keep bad actors out while facilitating and really while encouraging commerce between the U.S. and our neighbors to the north and south, our biggest trading partners, two of our biggest trading partners. This bill provides for, as I said earlier, 3,500 additional officers to work at our ports of entry. They're not ports along the water. They're actually ports, land-based ports where a lot of traffic moves through, a lot of commerce moves through. And 3,500 additional officers actually will make a big difference. We need them. We also need to modernize our ports so that these additional officers have the resources and tools they need to process legitimate travelers and trade while focusing on bad actors. And here are some of the examples of what we have done to upgrade our ports of entry. And I'm not going to, I don't know if we'll use all of these, but we'll use a couple of them. This is a before. This is a shot, I know it was probably about 6 years before, but we had limited, I think, very limited percentage of traveler queries. We had limited technology, and we had minimal signage. This is today. And we have nearly 100%, we call them traveler queries on land border. We have expansive use of RFID-enabled documents, increased efficiency by close to 25%. We have new ready lanes to encourage the use of these RFID documents as well. And here's, it's hard to, this is like a difference in signage. Simple, a lot of printed stuff. Here we've gone electronic. And we just stop in terms of the, here's what, we have the ability now, when the trucks are coming, when vehicles are coming in, we have the ability to read their license plates before they ever get close to the officer. We have the ability to, if people are coming across, we have the ability to use devices that read their passports and give us some idea who's actually coming up to the officer at the Customs and Border Patrol officer. We have, we use gamma rays. We're able to look inside trucks. We're able to use, we have detections, the ability to detect the radiation on any of the vehicles that are coming through. It's just a massive change. It's a massive change. And our ability to, we don't just do it because we want to secure the vehicles and make sure that what's supposed to be in them is actually in them, not some contraband or drugs or whatever. But we want to be able to expedite the movement of these vehicles. We want to have a better throughput because of the huge economic consequences for us and for Mexico. We want to strengthen our borders. And one of the reasons why we're making these investments, it's a twofer. We make them more secure. We keep bad people out. We keep bad stuff out. And we do a better job of facilitating legitimate trade. It's a smart way to do business. And we're going to be able to do a lot more of that smart way to do business with the help of this legislation. I think that's all we're going to do and look at in terms of these ports of entry. But if I could move along, Mr. President, I think properly balancing commerce and security is critical because facilitating trade with our neighbors to the south and also to the north not only strengthens our own economy, but also strengthens the economies throughout North, South, and Central America. Why do we care about that? Well, we want our economies to be stronger, so they won't all want to come up here and live with us and to come up here illegally and to try to be a part of this country, although we appreciate their desire to do that. We want to make sure that their countries are stronger economically, too. For most of those living in the U.S. illegally, though, what draws them to our country and enables them to stay here without legal statuses, as we know, are jobs. And we need, obviously, a system that makes it easier for employers to do the right thing and to verify who is eligible to work. Too often today, that's not the case. We also need to hold employers who knowingly break the law and hire undocumented workers accountable for doing that. I believe, again, the legislation that's before us comes close to achieving those goals. Requires all employers to use an electronic verification system, starting with larger employers down to smaller employers over time. But an electronic verification system designed to give employers quick assurance that the new employees are eligible to work that they're considering hiring. And for many workers, the system would include a photo tool that lets employers verify that the person applying for a job is indeed the same person who applied for the worker eligibility document. The bill also increases fines for knowingly hiring undocumented workers, and it increases them by more than tenfold and includes significant criminal penalties for those who systematically abuse our workplace laws. These new penalties, including jail sentences of up to 10 years, will provide a strong deterrent to unscrupulous employers who seek to exploit undocumented workers for their own gain. We also need to convince those who want to come here for a better life that the way to do that is through legal rather than illegal immigration. And while we crack down on the bad actors who try to hire undocumented workers, we also need to make sure that employers who are playing by the rules have ample access to the talent that they need to keep our economy growing and to encourage people from other nations to come here legally when we don't have the talent here in this country that's able or willing to do some of the work that needs to be done. But this legislation does that by modernizing our outdated visa systems to supply sufficient workers when needed, particularly in critical areas such as high skills and agricultural employment. These improved legal pathways for workers and their families will shrink the flow of undocumented migrants and help our border forces to concentrate on the most serious threats at the border. Now, ultimately, I believe the most effective force multiplier, as much as I like the idea of these drones fully resourced with the Vader systems on them, as much as I like the idea of having the C-206 aircraft with the right kind of surveillance equipment, as much as I like having the blimps with all the technology that they can carry, as much as I want to have helicopters can move our border patrol up and down the border and have all kinds of surveillance equipment, as much as I think fencing helps and access routes and all those investments help. I still think maybe the most effective force multiplier for securing our border is to take away the need for people to come here illegally in the first place. But as we address the root causes of illegal immigration, we've also got to address another immediate challenge, and that is the face of about 11 million people that are here without proper documentation who are living in the shadows today. And ironically, some 40% of them actually came here in a legal status. They came here on a student visa. They came here on a tourist visa. They came here maybe on a work visa. They've overstayed their welcome and overstayed their what the law allows. Now, some critics argue that the bill before us grants immediate amnesty to those 11 million undocumented people. I just don't think that's true. And what they get is not amnesty, but rather, I think, a hard path toward possible citizenship, one with many hurdles and no guarantees. So it kind of reminds me of the trek that a bunch of them took through Mexico just to get to the borders, getting across the borders without getting caught, trying to escape, in many cases, these coyotes who took advantage of them, robbed them, raped them. And once they got into this country, they had to avoid being detained. And a bunch of them got detained, ended up in detention centers. That's not an easy path. And I don't think the path that lays out ahead for those that are here undocumented today is an easy path. And just to reach the first step and become what's called a registered provisional immigrant, individuals who would have to clear multiple background checks, pay back taxes, pay a hefty fine. And if they committed any kind of significant crime, they're disqualified from pursuing legal status. Once an applicant has cleared the first hurdle, registered provisional immigrants must remain employed, pay even more taxes and fines, learn English, maintain a clean criminal record, and demonstrate that they're living not below the poverty line but above the poverty line, that they're gainfully employed. And most importantly, these people have to go to the back of the line, not ahead of people that are waiting to get ahead, but legally, who played by the rules, but behind them, at the end of the line, and behind the folks that are here legally and are going to get processed as they should first. It's going to take about, by our accounting here, about 10 years before those folks that are undocumented are going to have a chance to even qualify for a green card. 3 years after getting a green card, these immigrants would finally be eligible to apply for citizenship. We're not talking about 13 weeks. We're not talking about 13 months. We're talking about 13 years. And once again, they have to pass extensive background checks in order to successfully move forward in that process. So to our colleagues who are suggesting that this bill would immediately begin legalizing the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country right away, I'd simply ask, does that sound like an immediate process to you? It doesn't to me. This is not an easy path. And frankly, a lot of people won't make it, just like a lot of people trying to get into this country haven't made it either. But to me, the process we've laid out over those next 10, 13 years, if you will, is a tough, it's a fair, and it's a practical approach, and it's something, call a lot of things, I would not call it amnesty. We also need to make sure that the men and women around the world, though, know that this nation is making unprecedented investments to improve and modernize our legal immigration system, in addition to making it very difficult for folks who try to come here illegally. There's a messaging that's required, if you will. We're dedicating significant resources to detaining and deporting those who try to go around the rules. We're spending about roughly $2 billion a year on this effort. In fact, I think since President Obama took office, removals have increased from about 291,000 people in 2007, that's just under 300,000 folks, to more than 400,000 last year, when we returned a record number of people to their home countries. Our nation must also work with our neighbors to improve the process and decrease the time it takes to return our detainees to those countries of origin. When we were in Texas recently, I learned that we have an agreement with Guatemala where they issue electronic travel documents to their citizens, to people, almost as soon as we apprehend them along our border, mostly Texas. This process cuts down on detention times for Guatemalans from some 30 days to roughly 7 days. It has a real positive effect on the Guatemalans that we arrest, that we take into custody, because they spend less time in detention, not a pleasant experience. And it saved us millions of dollars because we have to hold them and feed them, give them a place to stay for a shorter period of time. We need to take that model, that Guatemalan model, where we reduce dramatically detention time, and see if we can't replicate their program with other nations, especially other nations than Mexico. And finally, Mr. President, I would conclude by admitting this legislation is not perfect. On the other hand, I've not seen really a perfect piece of legislation. Even the Constitution that we adopted first in Delaware, December 7th, 1787 rather, to become the first state. That wasn't perfect either. We've amended it again and again, over 30 times. While I do believe there's certainly room for constructive criticism and debate about this bill, and I'm certain that this legislation represents an improvement over our current system. I believe we can make it even stronger in the coming weeks, and I hope we will. I plan to offer some amendments. I guess the presiding officer is going to offer some amendments as well, and so will our colleagues. We ought to offer them, debate them, and vote them up or down. But we must come to this debate with an understanding that the status quo is unacceptable. If we don't modernize our immigration system to allow employers to fill the jobs our economy needs and our citizens are unable or unwilling to do, we're hurting our children's future while at the same time making our nation less secure. And as a nation founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we simply can't tolerate a shadow economy of 11 million people who are scared to live freely, who generate black markets to produce false identity documents, who drive down the wages of U.S. citizens. For my colleagues who are still uneasy with legalization, I'd ask this, well, what is the alternative? It is simply not practical to find and deport 11 million people. Most of the undocumented immigrants in this country today have lived here for more than 10 years. Many have children who are U.S. citizens. They have deep roots in our society, contribute meaningfully to our national interest. I think the American people want us to be tough. They also want us to be humane and realistic. And I believe this legislation offers us that path, that balance, and now is the time to take that path. And again, in closing, Mr. President, I'm reminding us something that binds all of us together. If we actually look above where you're sitting, there are some words in Latin. And if we look up there, we'll see the Latin phrase that says, e pluribus unum, and what that means, as we know, is out of many, one. Out of many, one. This phrase adorns our nation's seal, suggests that while we all come from many different places, in the end, we're one nation. With that thought in mind, Mr. President, I would simply say to our colleagues and to those who are following this discussion tonight, we have a choice. We can work together to make this bill better and adopt it in a bipartisan manner, or we can remain in gridlock and let the American people down. I know what I want to do. I know what the people of Delaware want us to do. They want us to legislate, and I want us to legislate as well. I want us to make our immigration system better. I want to show the American people that Congress can come together, Democrats, Republicans, a couple of independents, on an issue of great importance to our country's economy, great importance to our national security. We need to get this done. And I'm encouraged that with the grace of God, we will. And if I could, Mr. President, make one short unanimous consent request. I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that Gohar Sadeha, a fellow in our office, my Senate office, and Susan Corbin and Michelle Taylor, detailees of the Homeland Security, Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, be granted the privileges of the floor for the remainder of the first session of the 113th Congress.
Without objection.
Mr. President, you'll be glad to know I'm done. But our work remains to be done. And I look forward to working with you and 98 of our colleagues to get the job done for the American people. Thank you so much. And with that, I think we're done.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow, Thursday.
The Senate today continued debating the immigration legislation proposed by a bipartisan group of 8 senators. The bill would increase border security and workplace enforcement, allow tens of thousands of new workers into the country, and create a 13-year path to citizenship for the millions of immigrants already in the country illegally. The Senate is expected to continue debating amendments to the immigration bill tomorrow.